Hello everybody. This is going to be a very quick example of Apple Pay and Checkout.com. So this is a full payment example. You ideally want to look at the documentation first to get your merchant ID, your certificates, validate your domain, and all the rest of the steps. In this environment here, I'm just using Node and Express to have a small server where I can just have a front end and a back end. This is just because it was easier for me, but you can easily replicate this in whatever environment you have with whatever backend language that you have. So the first thing we're gonna do is basically take care of showing this Apple Pay button. Apple makes it quite easy because they take care of the styling for you. So what we can do in our HTML is simply just put a div here. I gave it a class so I can easily style it. And in my style sheet, I simply have a height and width for the button, and I only added this WebKey appearance, and I put it to be the Apple Pay button. So this is the simple magic property that basically takes care of this design. Apple offers a lot of options for customizing this or for changing the text. I'll share a link where you can find details about that. But for now, we're just going simple, so you can have a full example, and then you can add complexity to this whenever you want. So we took care of showing the button. So now that we can show the Apple Pay button, now we can focus on the logic. Initially, let's take care of the logic of showing the button only when Apple Pay is possible or whenever the customer can actually make payments with Apple Pay. So for this, we're just gonna add the script here, and I just called mine applepay.js, and I added a few functions here, and we're gonna go through all of this. But first, let's start at the top. So I just declared some things that we're gonna use along the lines. So first, I added my merchant ID. So this is what you obtain if you follow the steps in the documentation. And then I just added two URLs. So this is gonna be used later to validate the session and to actually make a payment. So you can leave these blank for now. And now I just added a selector. I just added a query for the Apple Pay button, and the first thing we're gonna look at here is basically only displaying the Apple Pay button whenever the customer can actually make payments with their cards. So to do that, we actually gonna set the button style initially to be disabled. So we're gonna say um, display none. So if we actually comment this out and we refresh here, we're not going to see any button. But in this if condition, we basically look, okay, is the Apple Pay session, and by the way, this is something that uh, uh, exists in Safari browsers. Apple takes care of it. So first we check if the Apple Pay session exists, and then we check if the customer can actually make payments with their active cards. So what this does is it doesn't only check if Apple Pay is possible in the browser, it also checks if the customer can actually pay with Apple Pay. So if we do this and if that condition is met, we just say that we want to set the display of the payment button to be blocked. So we actually want to see the button. So if we refresh here for a second, we shouldn't see anything, and then a few milliseconds after, we see the button because it reaches this if condition. Now that we know how to conditionally render the Apple Pay button, let's take care of what happens when the customer clicks on the button. So here I just added a simple event listener. So whenever you click it, this gets triggered. And in this, we do a few things. So the first one is we're starting a new Apple Pay session. So in this, you basically set details about what is the transaction value, what's the currency of the transaction, what kind of cards do you want to accept in this transaction. So here I can say I want Visa, MasterCard, Amex, and so on. But if, for example, I don't want one of the schemes, I can also take them out. Apple also gives you the option to exclude like credit cards, for example, if you only want to use debit. But there's a lot of customization options, and I'll link this as well. But for now, we just have a simple transaction that is going to be for $10. we're going to say that we accept most of the schemes out there, and it's going to be in US dollars. So all we do here is we create a variable and we say we want to create a new Apple Pay session. We mentioned the version here. Again, Apple documents their versions and what each version does. I think the latest one as of right now is version 6. So we're going to use the latest one. And then we just want to say country code and all the details here. And after we create it, we're just going to say Apple session begin. And then we're gonna leave the rest commented. So we're gonna take this and comment it out. And the second thing that I did, and this should theoretically just open the Apple Pay pop-up. So if we go on the right here and we just refresh this, now we conditionally see the button because we have this if condition here. And let's see what happens when I actually click the button. So we're gonna click it. So it takes a few seconds or a few milliseconds, but I see this Apple Pay pop-up where I can essentially choose the cards that I want to pay with. But you see this processing, this loader thing here, and it doesn't really ask me to authenticate this with my fingerprint or with Face ID. It's just saying processing. This is because the next important step that we have to do is to actually validate the Apple Pay session. So we're gonna cancel this, and we're gonna take a look at the few handlers that Apple Pay provides to you. So the first one is, and the first handler that is going to be called whenever you initiate a new Apple Pay session, is called on validate merchant. So this is where you want to actually go to your backend and validate the session. The important thing that Apple gives you in this handler is a validation URL. So if you add a handler here, you can get it as event.validation URL. So I just took that validation URL, and I have a separate function here called validate session, which I'm basically sending the validation URL to, and then I just have a simple callback. So let's see what we do in the validate session. So if I expand everything here, I essentially do a post request. So I'm using Axios here, but you can use whatever HTTP. You can just do Ajax or whatever HTTP client that you want. So I'm basically sending this validation URL that I got in the onValidate merchant, and I'm sending it to my server side, and I'm expecting a response. And whenever I get the response, I just call the callback function, and this basically gets me back to here. So in an ideal situation, I will go to my backend, I will create the session, and then whenever I get the response back, I will just say Apple Pay session complete merchant validation, and I'll pass the session. So let's actually have a look on the server side and see what we do on the backend. So here I'm basically saying do a post request to my backend validation validate session. If you remember here at the top, I just defined this as being the URL that I'm currently at /validate session. So if I go to my backend, I essentially have a route here that says validate session, and whenever you do a post to it, you will try to get the Apple URL, and this will essentially do a post request to that URL that Apple provides, and it will do it with the .pem and .key files that you got if you follow the steps to get the configuration for Apple Pay. So I'm essentially just creating a new HTTP agent here. So I'm just setting the .pem and the .key, and then I'm basically just doing a post request, and I'm specifying the merchant ID that I have, the domain that I'm targeting. So the domain that I'm testing here, this one is called dubai.angular.io. I can give it a nice name, and I'm just passing the HTTP agent here just to so I can use the .pem and .key file in this post request. So this is essentially just a normal post request, but besides just sending a body, I'm actually sending the two files as well. And this is done to this is a post request done to the URL that we received in that handler. So whenever you hit this validate session, it's going to do the post request with the certificates, with the details here, and it will return a session. And then if we go back to our front-end code, whenever this happens, we call the callback, And then we finally say Apple Pay session complete the merchant validation. So if we save this and we actually try to click, we're actually going to refresh this. We're going to click the Apple Pay button, and this is going to take a second. It's going to say processing, but this time it's going to say that I need to pay with my Touch ID. So it moved away from this processing state because it validated the session. Now that we know how to conditionally display the Apple Pay button and we know how to validate the Apple Pay session, so we actually get prompted to enter to put our fingerprint or to do Face ID, let's have a look at what happens whenever we actually authorize the transaction. So there's a very useful handler that Apple Pay gives you, which is called onPaymentAuthorize, which is the handler that gets triggered whenever you actually authenticate the transaction with Face ID or Touch ID. In this function, you get a lot of information about the transaction, so you can get the email of the customer and so on. Apple provides a lot more details in their documentation, but the thing that we care about for now is the Apple Pay payment token because it's the one that we're going to use to actually process a transaction. So we're just going to get it from the handler, and we're going to send it to our backend. So I created a function here called pay, where I'm going to send the token, and I have a callback function here, and whenever it's successful, I'm going to show success. Whenever it's failed, I'm going to show failure. So in my pay function, I simply do a post request to my backend server URL. So this is the one that I declared earlier. So at the top it was /pay. And I'm basically just sending the Apple Pay token. And then whenever I get a response back, I'm just calling the callback. And if we look at what we do in the API, here I'm actually using the checkout.com Node.js SDK. But again, you can just do this by doing normal post request and just follow the documentation for Apple Pay for the two API calls that I'm going to mention. So the first thing that I'm going to do is from this Apple Pay token, I'm just going to extract the thing that checkout.com wants. So there's a payment data object in that payment token. And then from that payment data object, I just need the version, data, signature, and header. And now I'm just doing I'm creating a checkout.com token. So again, you're gonna see the documentation on how to do this with the normal post request, but this just makes it easier. So I'm gonna provide the token data here and all the details about the Apple Pay token. And once I get this checkout.com token, I'm actually just gonna do a payment request. So again, I'm just using the Node SDK here, but you can just do it using whatever backend language that you have. It's all documented. So I'm gonna take the checkout token. It's just called token in the response, and I'm actually gonna do the transaction for $10. So we have the full interaction of first getting the transaction to be authorized biometrically, and then Apple giving us the payment token, we sending the payment token to our backend server, and here we're essentially just doing two API calls. One to get the payment token transformed into a checkout.com token, and then the second one is actually to send a payment request using checkout.com with that token that we just generated. So two API calls are happening here, and then I'm just sending back the response. And the last thing is just basically showing success or failure whenever the transaction is successful or not. So I'm pretty sure that Apple is not going to let me record this on my laptop. So you're going to see in a few seconds an example filmed from my phone.